Good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the roundtable within the series of the global governance. Today we are going to discuss a very challenging issue, migration as a global challenge. Well, since earliest times, humanity has been on the move. Some people move in search of new economic opportunities and horizons. Others move to escape armed conflict, poverty, food insecurity, persecution, terrorism, or human rights violations and abuses. Still others do so in response to the adverse effects of climate change, natural disasters, some of which may be linked to climate change or other environmental factors. Many move, indeed, for a combination of these reasons. We are witnessing in today's world an unprecedented level of human mobility. The number of international migrants worldwide has continued to grow over the past 17 years, reaching 258 million in 2017, up to 248 million in 2015. Today I have a privilege to welcome in Blues Hall good friends, colleagues, and senior ambassadors from the United Nations who are going to share with you on their vision on the problems of migration, this phenomena which bringing new challenges to the mankind. We will speak today about the about this phenomena from the point of view of divinity, of morality, of ethics, of politics, of the global management. And I would like to start this discussion inviting to the panel the good friend of mine and a person who is well known in the diplomatic community of the United Nations, who chaired a lot of the different bodies here, Ambassador Omar Hilale. His country this year is presiding the summit on Global Compact, the new configuration which is trying to bring the more clearance on what is migration is, and to help identify those problems which have not been identified in international documents on the refugees, even a declaration, New York Declaration on migration. So this is a very challenging summit. Ambassador Hilale made a lot of efforts in the United Nations to bring a harmony and consensus, and he is going to share with you today on his country vision and his own on the process around the Global Compact and what the global community expected from the summit in Morocco. Ambassador Hilale, you have floor, sir.
Thank you very much, dear Yuriy. I'm very humbled and happy, privileged to come here to your university and to exchange with the students and staff and professors on very important topics, which is migration. Ladies and gentlemen, migration is nowadays the #1 topic both in national politics and in international relations. While migration has existed throughout human history, this topic only grew in importance during the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, humans have always been migrating all around the world, seeking a better life or fleeing conflict and disaster or violation of human rights, as my colleague and friend Yuriy just explained in his introductory remarks. But in 2011, major events occurred at the doors of Europe, the so-called Arab Spring, which led to the fall of the safety belt around Europe. These events were the main trigger for the very first UN summit to be solely devoted to the large movement of migrants and refugees, which took place on the margin of the General Assembly in September 2016. There was consensus that the world needs a joint action, better manage migration. The regional and informal process were not enough. Dealing with specific aspects of migration was not enough. The world needed a global and comprehensive approach for migration. So the New York Declaration, which was adopted at that summit, gave birth to the ongoing process leading to the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, JCM, to be adopted in Marrakesh on 10 December 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, the JCM is a landmark achievement for migration. Once adopted, it will be the very first UN document defining a common approach to international migration in all its dimensions. The GCM is not legally binding. It is grounded in values of state sovereignty, responsibility sharing, non-discrimination, and human rights, and recognize that a cooperative approach is needed to optimize the overall benefit of migration while addressing its risks and challenges for individuals and communities in countries of origin, transit, and destination. The elaboration of GCM was not an easy task. It took more than a year and a half to reach an agreement of the 31 pages of substance of the document. Two co-facilitators, the ambassadors of Mexico and Switzerland, led the preparatory process. It comprised 3 phases. First, the consultation phase through a series of 6 informal thematic sessions, numerous regional consultations, as well as stakeholders consultations held between April and November 2017. Second, the stock-taking phase during conference in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico in December 2017. It assessed all inputs received during the consultation phase. It allowed shaping the vision for the zero draft of the GCM. Third, the negotiations phase, which started on 5th February and finished in 13 July 2018. 6th round of lengthy and hard intergovernmental negotiations were necessary to reach an agreement on the draft GCM, which will be adopted in Marrakesh. Let me now move to the contents of the GCM. First, let's answer four basic questions about GCM. First, how is the Global Compact structured and what is in it? The GCM begins with preamble and 10 guiding principles, including national sovereignty, the non-binding character of the document under international law, and the commitment to universality of human rights. The GCM comprises 23 objectives which aim at 1. Mitigating the adverse drivers and structural factors that push people to leave their countries of origin. 2. Reducing the risk and vulnerability migrants face at a different stage of migration. 3. Addressing the concern of states and community. 4. Creating conducive conditions that enable all migrants to enrich society. Second question, will the GCM result in national sovereign rights being relinquished or curtailed? No. The answer is no. Upholding national sovereignty is guiding principles of GCM. The GCM confirms the sovereign rights of, and I'm quoting here, the GCM reaffirms the sovereign right of states to determine their national migration policy and their prerogative to govern migration within their jurisdiction in conformity with international law. End of quotation. Paragraph 15C. National sovereign rights will neither be curtailed or transferred. The GCM will not be an international agreement and will therefore have no legal effects on national legal system. Third question, will the GCM establish a right to migrate? The GCM will not create any new legal categories. It expressly points out that national sovereignty will be upheld, especially when it comes to residence and border issues. At the same time, the GCM explicitly stresses the human rights of all migrants. This includes support for migrants in especially dangerous situations, in particular children, in line with valid obligation under international law. The fourth question is, what impact will the GCM have in regular migration? The GCM aims at making migration orderly and regular. Negative structural factors in country of origin which lead to migration should be minimized. That's the objective number 2. Smugglers and human trafficking combated transnationally. That's objective 9 and 10. And border management better coordinated. Regular migration, on the other hand, which is necessary in many parts of the world due to demographic realities and in order to meet the needs of the labor market, should be facilitated. At this stage, I would like to highlight a couple of aspects that I believe are worth mentioning. First one is, reading the first part of the GSM, inter alia, the preamble, the vision and the guideline and the guiding principles, one is struck by the positive narrative on migration. While in the media and in politics, migration is often subject to criticism, the GCM attests that migration is, and I quote, a source of prosperity, innovation, sustainable development, and so forth, and not at all as a problem. Contrary to the myths surrounding migration, the GCM confirms that, and here I quote again, majority of migrants around the world travel, work, and live in safe, regular, and orderly manner. End of quotation. The GCM defines 3 case words for successful migration: commonality, sharing, and unity. These are significant words with positive connotation, calling upon all of us to work together in positive spirit to make migration work for all. Second aspect is analyzing the 23 objectives set out in the GCM. 2 main conclusions can be drawn. Roughly, 7 objectives are for implementation in countries of origin. 14 objectives can be considered as for countries of destination, among which 11 objectives are also for transit countries. This distribution makes sense as we speak about immigrants. We are talking about a person on the move, leaving his or her country, either in transit country or at the destination. 20 out of the 23 objectives are centered on migrants themselves. They aim at protecting migrants, promoting their rights, and guaranteeing their access to the services they require. This number refers to the centrality of migrants in the GCM. Third dimension is looking at the implementation and follow-up section. We find 2 innovations. First one is a new design of capacity buildings through a state-of-the-art mechanism which will open new opportunities with a new approach for building capacities. It's based on 3 pillars. 1, a connection hub that facilitates a demand-driven, tailor-made and integrated solution. 2, startup fund for initial financing to realize project-oriented solution. 3, a global knowledge platform as an online open data source. The second element is an international migration review forum with a periodicity of 4 years starting in 2022. It will be a forum at the global level through which member states can review the implementation progress and guide the direction of the work of the United Nations. It will serve as a primary intergovernmental global platform for member states to discuss and share progress on the implementation of all aspects of the GCM. In recognition of regional character of migration, which is central for better management of migration, the Global Forum will proceed by regional, sub-regional, and cross-regional forums starting 2020. In order to follow this important development, the Secretary General decided to establish a United Nations network on migration to ensure effective and coherent system-wide support for implementation, including the capacity building mechanism, as well as follow-up and review of the Global Compact in response to the needs of member states. It is expected that IOM, International Organization on Migration, will serve as the coordinator and secretariat of the network, and that the network will fully draw from the technical expertise and experience of relevant entities within the United Nations system. The work of the network will be fully aligned with existing coordination mechanisms and the repositioning of the United Nations development system. The network will be officially launched on 9 December in Marrakesh, Morocco. Ladies and gentlemen, what will happen in Marrakesh next month? The meeting in Marrakesh next December is not intended to be a purely ceremonial event to adopt the G7. Morocco is offering more than such a sample meeting. What Morocco is proposing is a global event which aspires to meet the expectation of the migration community. To this end, Morocco is proposed to hold the conference back-to-back with the 11th summit of GCF-MD, Global Forum on Migration and Development, which was scheduled in Marrakesh from 5 to 7 December 2018. Bringing together these two events builds up to the Migration Week of Marrakesh. In between, some 60 side events will be organized during the weekend of 8 and 9 December, including the 5th Mayors Forum on Mobility, Migration and Development. First one in Africa will coincide with the launching of GFMD Mayors mechanism and the Youth Forum and some other 55 side events on different aspects linked to migration. The program of conference will comprise the following: an opening session with the formal adoption of GCM. I would like to reiterate that there will be no signing of the GCM. Like any other UN General Assembly document, it will be just adopted by governing by the chair of the Marrakesh Conference. 2, a plenary meeting which will be running all day long from 9 to 8 during the 2 days of the conference. This will be the space where head of delegation will deliver their main statement to the conference. 3, 2 dialogues which will be held in parallel with the plenary. The first dialogue will focus on promoting action on the commitment of GCM, while the second will discuss partnership and innovative initiative for the way forward. As far as participation is concerned, I would like to highlight the following. Level of participation: the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 72-244 on the modalities of the conference underlined that later shall be held at the highest level possible, including head of states and government. Ladies and gentlemen, the following question that many of you might ask is, what will happen after Marrakesh? First things, immediately after Marrakesh will be adoption by the General Assembly in New York of the report of the conference, which will contain the GCM. This adoption is scheduled to around the 19th of December. This will be the opportunity for all those who have comments or explanation to make on the GCM. And to conclude, I would say that the adoption of GCM by the end of this year should not be seen as the end of this process. At the contrary, Marrakesh will be the first step. It will mark the beginning of the real work at all levels. While the international community should applaud the text of GCM, the latter won't have any value if it's not followed up with appropriate and concrete implementation measures. As such, as the migration community fought hard to get to this stage where finally the very first UN document dealing with all aspects of migration will be adopted. Effort should be doubled to make sure that the provision of the GCM are translated in ground with adequate and concrete actions and measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Omar, for presenting us this global document, but it is not a declaration. It is very concrete steps the global community are to agree in Morocco. What we would like to wish, inshallah. Well, God help you with that. You did a tremendously good job. And now I'm going to give the floor to a person who is on the daily information board in the United Nations. When you enter the United Nations building and see the table of the events, you will see Holy See, Holy See, Holy See, and particularly when it is about the migration. So let me introduce you, His Excellency, the Most Reverend Bernardito C, titular Archbishop of Slovakia, Apostolic Nuncio, Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations, and the Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the Organization of American States. This is the full title to a person who had behind a huge career. His portrait, his CV just in front of you. And of course, all the colleagues here, they are representing their states. And Ambassador is going to share with you on His Holiness, All Holiness Pope Francis' vision on the global challenges of migration. Thank you to be with us today, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished professors, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pretty sure that I'm neither the first Catholic nor the first member of the Catholic clergy to speak at Yale, an institution originally founded by the Puritan Congregational Clergy to form ministers to purify Anglicanism from whatever vestiges of Roman Catholic Church was still there. So I would like to begin with thanking you very much for this wonderful invitation, which I was very pleased to accept. And I would like also to express deep appreciation of your interest in the global challenge that is migration. There are us here, four colleagues from there are four of us here from the United Nations. I would like to focus my talk on a kind of a universal dimension of migration, and specifically on Pope Francis and his vision and his idea on global migration. Migration is as old as humanity itself. At the dawn of the historical biblical account, we have Abraham, who with his family migrated from the Ur of the Chaldeans, from what is now Iraq, and settled in Canaan. What better biblical images of the phenomenon of migration can there be than the mass migration of the house of Israel to Egypt in flight from famine, and the reverse migration, the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt back to Canaan to emancipate themselves from tyranny and slavery. These round-trip migrations, so to speak, already tells us what are the primary drivers of migration, namely family reunification, with the whole family of Jacob joining Joseph in Egypt, poverty and want as a result of the famine in Canaan, the gross violations of human rights leading to violent conflicts when the Israelites were reduced to slavery and hunted down by the Egyptian forces, and biblically and literally speaking, the longing for a promised land. The Bible, especially the Pentateuch, are replete with injunctions to welcome strangers, because as Moses reminded them, you yourselves were also strangers in a foreign land. As the International Director of the Interreligious Affairs for the American Jewish Committee, Rabbi David Rosen, has said, Judaism has an ancient history as migrants that informs the Jewish teaching to help others in vulnerable situations. And all the other major religious traditions and cultural traditions have similar injunctions on caring for strangers. During the last centuries before Christ and the first centuries AD, the Jews and the Phoenicians, the Greeks and the Romans were all over the Mediterranean basin. In the early Middle Ages, the barbarians were not only at the gates, they settled down among the ruins of the bygone Roman Empire. The New World was born from movements of peoples, with Christopher Columbus in Hispaniola in 1492, with Vasco da Gama rounding the Cape of Good Hope in 1497, and Ferdinand Magellan literally in my backyard in the Philippines in 1521. In fact, he died just a couple of miles from where I was born. So we would not have time to discuss the vices and the virtues of the centuries of colonization, but I guess it suffices to say that at this moment, that these historical landmarks ushered in transcontinental migrations. Fast forwarding to the last 3 centuries in the United States, we had the English, the Irish, and the Italians rapidly populating New York and the New England states, the Nordics and the Germans and the Poles in the Great Lakes, and the Chinese and the Filipinos creeping into the shores of California. The Indians and the Latinos filled large parts of what is now the Southwest, and the Africans were forcibly brought across the Atlantic to the American South and beyond as slaves. These voluntary and involuntary migrations were the tesserae of what has become the prosperous and the beautiful mosaic that is the United States of America. Today, consider these data, which His Excellency has already mentioned. In 2017, 258 million people moved across international borders, not just across their fences, but across international borders, a 50% increase in 17 years. And the refugees from 16 million in 2010 to 26 million in 2017, more than 60% increase in just 7 years. And around 70 million of those, 68.5, are forced from their homelands, especially in Babel because of armed conflicts. And then added to that, around 40 million people, victims of human trafficking. And therefore, it is very clear that migration is a global challenge, that migration has become a leading factors in so many discussions, in so many policies that governments across the world are making. And I would just like to say that migration has also become one of the great pastoral priorities of Pope Francis and one of the priorities of the international activity of the Holy See. So I would just like to ask the question probably, what does the Holy See, or how does the Holy See consider migration? And what approach does the Holy See recommend? For the sake of time, I will respond rapidly to these questions. With regard to the Holy See's understanding of migration, I would like to make 3 points. First, as I have tried to illustrate from Abraham to the United Nations 2017 statistics on migrants and refugees, migration is not a new phenomenon. As I've said, migration is as old as humanity itself. While massive numbers have recently been forced to leave their homes due to violent conflicts, persecution, and grave violations of human rights, natural and man-made disasters, and the scourge of poverty, migration is both a natural response to crisis and a natural innate desire of every human being for happiness, greater opportunities, and a better life. Second, the Holy See believes in both the right to migrate and the prior right not to migrate. Voluntary, safe, orderly, regular, and well-managed migration contributes to development and to cultural enrichment. During the negotiations leading to the 2016 New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, the Holy See suggested a phrase that is now enshrined in the Declaration. It is an appeal to the international community together to create conditions that allow communities and individuals to live in safety and dignity in their own countries. The Holy See was also a principal contributor to what is now paragraph 13 of the Global Compact that His Excellency just mentioned, which states, "We must work together to create conditions that allow communities and individuals to live in safety and dignity in their own countries." In order to achieve these conditions, the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to leave their country of origin must be minimized. I was pleased to find in the Global Compact a mantra that the Holy See practically always repeated during all the negotiations and even before the negotiations of the Global Compact, namely that migration should never be an act of desperation. Third, the fundamental human rights of all migrants, regardless of their migration status, must be respected. During the negotiations in the Global Compact on Migration, the Holy See requested an explicit enumeration of services that must be provided to migrants as flowing from their fundamental human rights and thus cannot be denied to them. While there was no consensus on this, there is nevertheless the explicit commitment to ensure that all migrants, regardless of their migration status, can exercise their human rights through safe access to basic services. With regard to the approach the Holy See recommends to deal with the global phenomenon of migration, there is a phrase that we beat to death at the United Nations almost in every turn, namely that a global challenge demands a global response. There are other phrases that we also beat to death. Besides that, I'd say much has been done, but much still remains to be done. That's always true. Now, the global phenomenon of migration, therefore, requires a global response. In a phrase, this means shared responsibility. While recognizing and respecting the sovereign right of individual states to make their respective policies on migration, of course, according to their international obligations and to international humanitarian law, the Holy See is a strong believer and supporter of regional and global frameworks to make migration safe, orderly, regular, and voluntary. Thus, from the very outset, the Holy See was very supportive of the whole process, leading to both the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration and the Global Compact on refugees. I would like to end with on how Pope Francis has summarized his vision on migration and how to approach the global challenge. Pope Francis has summarized in 4 verbs the overall approach of the Catholic Church to the global challenge of migration. These 4 verbs are to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate. To welcome. This means to offer migrants broader options to enter destination countries safely and legally, and to assure that their repatriation, which is normally voluntary, is carried out under just and safe conditions. Migrants must be guaranteed personal safety and access to basic services regardless of their status. In all instances, the centrality of the human person obliges us to treat every migrant with dignity and respect. That is to welcome. The second verb is to protect. All necessary steps must be taken to defend fundamental human rights and the dignity of migrants regardless of their migratory status. Such protection begins in the country of origin and consists in offering reliable and verified information before departure and in providing safety from illegal recruiters, human smugglers, and traffickers. This protection must continue as the migrant moves through countries of transit and arrive in countries of destination. In safeguarding the fundamental dignity of every migrant, we must strive to find alternative solutions to detention. The Holy See does not believe or does not see detention of a migrant child as in the best interest of the child as defined in the Convention of the Rights of the Child. That is to protect. The third verb is to promote. Going beyond the protection of the rights and dignity of migrants, effective policies and programs should be in place as much as possible to ensure that migrants are able to contribute to or earn their upkeep, exercise their fundamental freedoms, improve their skills and better their education, participate in the social life of their host communities, and contribute to the common good. Fourth and lastly, to integrate. When migration is well managed, and a culture of encounter is fostered, migrants make a positive contribution to the economy, to social and cultural life, and to enriching communities. Integration is not assimilation that leads migrants to suppress or to forget their own cultural identity. Rather, integration is a process of mutual knowledge and reciprocal openness to what is good and positive from each other's cultural identity. We all know integration is a huge challenge, that in many instances where failure to fit in can lead to social exclusion and social disharmony. To minimize the negative impacts of migration, community-level initiatives and legislative measures are both needed to achieve integration. Ladies and gentlemen, and I must. So I would like to end by emphasizing and recommending what His Excellency has already illustrated to us, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. The Holy See believes that it is an historic advance in our shared responsibility to act in solidarity with people on the move, especially those who find themselves in very difficult and precarious situations. The Global Compact will serve as the international reference point for best practices and international cooperation in the global management of migration. The Compact will be successful if it becomes a guide, an effective guide of a shared journey of solidarity and largeness of spirit, of respect and responsibility towards migrants. This journey can only happen if all of us will make our own contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you indeed. And thank you for bringing us to the golden rule, or rule of reciprocity. Do to others what you want them to do to you, and don't do what you do not want to do to you. And so all the religions are saying on the protection of the strangers, of the migrants. Even we can find it in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has a right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has a right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Everyone has a right to a nationality. So all the religions, the international documents, universal documents are saying about that. But on the ground, we have different pictures. We have today two colleagues who are representing the different regions. Eastern Asia, Europe, where the situation is not so easy as we would like to have. And so I would like them to share with us their vision, how to implement the ideas, universal ideas into the practice. And I would like to invite to take a floor a representative of a country which is generously hosting the huge amount of the refugees. As to the United Nations calculations, around 929,000 Rohingya refugees sheltering in Bangladesh. And today we have a privilege to have today at this table His Excellency Ambassador Masud Bin Momen, permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations. A personality who has a huge experience in the international organizations. He knows exactly what does it mean, food crisis, serving in the food organization, World Food Programs. So you may find all these details on the screen. But what is going on in his country, this is something which is amazing. We have to applaud them, what they are doing. And what the international community could contribute to help the solution of the Rohingya crisis and other crises is what we are waiting well to hear from your address. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Yuriy, for inviting me and for the introduction. Indeed, it's a pleasure for me for being invited here by the Yale Macmillan Center. We have already heard from Ambassador Hilale, the host of the GCM next month, and also how the background of this GCM, and also from the representative from the Holy See. In fact, Holy See has been very much involved throughout the negotiations and upholding the win-win narrative of migration, or the positive story of migration. So that's why I express my gratitude to the Holy See and its participation. Before coming to the specific question of the Rohingyas, I just had a few points on the GCM, and if permitted by Ambassador Hilale, to offer my small critique of what we have so far, and what we can aspire to have. Now, regarding the migration, whether it is a global challenge or not, we believe that despite many real challenges, there is ample evidence that migration is beneficial for both the migrants and the host communities in economic and social terms. And the basic challenge before us, how to maximize the benefits of migration rather than remaining obsessed about minimizing the so-called risks. Nowadays, all the countries, or most of the countries, are at the same time countries of origin, transit, destination, as well as return. Now, Bangladesh is a major migrant sending country, or used to be, and we have almost about 10 million expatriates and the diaspora community abroad, and we have a whole array of migrants across the globe, from low-skilled to blue-collar, as well as professionals. Remittance has a robust role in transcending our national growth and investment. On the other hand, as mentioned, we also are having the experience as a receiving country, and since 25th of August 2017, last year, we have received more than 700,000 Rohingyas who are forcibly displaced from the northern Rakhine province of Myanmar. And before that, another 86,000, and before that, a few hundred more thousand. So altogether, right now, Bangladesh is hosting more than 1 million, or close to 1.1 million of these people. And the government recognizes the human face of this grave crisis and opened its borders for saving lives, and continue to support the distressed Rohingyas with its limited resources to meet up their basic needs. To attain a peaceful solution, Bangladesh government has been exercising both bilateral and multilateral channels, and the safe and the dignified return of the Rohingyas to their homeland is our priority. And just to share with the audience here, tomorrow we are going to consider the resolution, this year's resolution in the third committee on the situation on Myanmar, and where it is expected to be voted upon. Like last year, this resolution was adopted with a vote of 135 in favor, 10 against, and 26 abstentions. Last year's resolution was co-sponsored by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. However, this year, given the gravity of the situation and also the increased or heightened level of awareness, we have both the European Union as well as OIC as the co-sponsors, and as of today we have 101 co-sponsors for this resolution. So this resolution is actually all about having some sort of accountability for the atrocities that were allegedly committed against the Rohingyas. So without such accountabilities in place, we feel it is very difficult to convince or persuade the Rohingyas to return to their homeland. Tomorrow also happens to be another important day where the actual repatriation is supposed to begin between the two countries. But we are sort of facing a very tough choice or decision, or hit a kind of a crossroad where we are finding it very difficult for our people to find Rohingyas who would be willing to go back unless there is a conducive sort of environment or atmosphere inside the Rakhine province. So we need this, as you said, that what the international community can do. So I believe that the international community, the academia and the civil society, they can all support these kind of actions in the General Assembly or sometimes in the Security Council or the Human Rights Council, so that Myanmar will be persuaded to do more, both in terms of improving the ground situation or having a better conducive environment for the return, as well as to have some kind of accountability, credible accountability mechanism in place so that these people have more confidence to go back. So this is where things stand right now. We think that migration is not a problem but a solution for many development challenges. The Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development has labeled migration as one of the major enablers for development and portrayed migrants as the agent of change. It recognizes the important role of migration in reducing inequality within and between states, as well as its effectiveness as a tool for addressing economic and social disparities and attaining gender equality. To optimize its full benefits, migration needs to be safe, orderly, regular, and responsible, as stated in SDG 10.7. Now, how we can make this happen? A few points come to my mind. I will not elaborate here for the brevity of time. Just mention, for example, we must strengthen the rule of law at all levels, and migrants should feel an obligation to avail legal and regular channels of migration and move between countries in an orderly fashion. Security and public confidence matters. States and the citizens of the Republic have legitimate reasons to demand secure borders and the capacity to determine who enters and stays in their territories. But the counterproductive and discriminatory policies for restricting migration often corrodes the high values of a welfare state and leaves migrants in a security-centric dilemma as far as the host countries are concerned. As already mentioned, it has to be a shared responsibility to ensure the governance or the movement of the people. It cannot be the sole responsibility of a single country or a single host community. Then migration should not be undertaken as an act of desperation, already mentioned by the distinguished Holy See representative. It should be a choice. Restrictive or ineffectual labor policies, laws, and employment customs often create major obstacles in optimizing the economic and social potentials of the migrant workers. So the labor laws, if they are poorly governed, and also if the decent work circumstances are not created, then it will also have a problem. Migrant workers of all types are often excluded from even basic coverage by social protection instruments and schemes in some of the host countries. So this is another issue. Another disturbing trend is the utilization of detention as a deterrent measure to stop irregular migration. So we try to address this also in the GCM. Migration debate at the UN, I think Ambassador Hilale very eloquently covered that, starting from the New York Declaration and the lack of documents and rules and conventions in this regard, and now this global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration is a kind of a watershed development in this UN discourse. Now, what we expect from the Global Compact, here I'll offer some critiques. As one of the promoters of this concept, Bangladesh wanted a more ambitious and aspirational compact that is more legally binding in nature. We placed the commitments of New York Declaration as a baseline and aimed at further advancement in all its aspects. In this compact, we feel we could have done more for the migrants. With some more flexibility, we could have dropped the reference to non-legally binding compact, pushed the reference to the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrants, Workers, and Members of their families, which, by the way, only 51 ratifying countries, and most of the developed countries are out of it. To the body of the text from the footnote, which appears only in the footnote at the current format, we could have included a saving clause and have commitments for ending child detentions, which we failed. Some other important issues also remain unresolved, which, however, should not block our ambitions to do more for the migrants in future. Because we like to believe, Ambassador Hilale hinted this, what next? That this global compact is a living document. And this is just the beginning, which he also mentioned. The global compact will be judged not by its substance, by its ability to bring positive changes on the ground. At this point, I would also like to mention many of you from academia, perhaps you will also appreciate this, that the possible impact of the fourth industrial revolution, which is marked by the advent of artificial intelligence, 3D printing, robotics, driverless cars, etc. This technology is already there. It is a matter of time for artificial intelligence to change our business models. When it will happen, the traditional way of looking into migration will have to be changed. There will be less importance on skill training or skill matching in the traditional sense, as well as obtaining new skills through human migration. Mechanical hands will replace those of human in job sectors. The market economy will not follow the model of its business as usual. The supply-demand model needs to be reshaped, and the developing countries like Bangladesh will face enormous challenges, as the dividend of having a large pool of human resources may not benefit the economy in the same way as it is envisaged today. Only a living global compact could address these uncertain dynamics in the market and accordingly shape the policy landscape for global human mobility. It has not been really addressed, but I think we need to take a very serious look at it. The other issue is the global community needs to think more on the climate change and migration continuum. The topic is well placed in the global compact, but the broader perspective is missing. Sometimes the demarcation line between a refugee and a climate displaced person is very, very fine. Both need special treatment and international protection. Particular focus needs to be placed on addressing internal displacement due to climate change, as well as on the capacity building of neighboring states, as they are the first responders in case of climate displacement. As a climate vulnerable country, Bangladesh fully realized the importance of adoption of mitigation and rehabilitation in dealing with this continuum. More research and credible data are essential to approach this issue holistically. Sometimes from a narrow political standpoint, we tend to make a binary division between regular and irregular migrants. Yet regular migrants range from individuals on short-term work or student visas to permanent residents of foreign countries and those who acquire a new citizenship. Likewise, there is a spectrum of irregular migration from overstaying a visa to deliberate efforts to undermine the border controls. So this is another issue where we need to focus. Few member states have announced their decision of withdrawing themselves from the compact. This happens at a time when the xenophobic political narratives about migration are all too widespread. We need to understand that migration-related challenges could only be better dealt with thoroughly dispelling alarmist misperceptions of these effects. Political leaders are to take responsibility for reframing national discourses on the issue, as well as for policy reforms through mainstreaming migration in national development strategies. Realistic policy debates supported their better data on migration should encourage at national level. Besides governments, civil society, academia and business need to play a bigger role in changing these perceptions and make lives better for the migrants. So I think I've covered quite a bit, and maybe during the question and answer session we can discuss more. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Thank you. Well, I am sharing your concerns. I would like that diplomacy would be not the art of possible, but the art of impossible. And thank you for mentioning the climate change migrants. It is true that all refugees are migrants, but not all migrants are refugees in terms of the legal recognition. And so we are waiting, of course, from Morocco summit, well, to have a first step, and then we will encourage the next steps, well, to bring more legacy in understanding the phenomena of migration and to bring all the migrants at least in the same legal field. And last but not the least, my good friend and neighbor, Ambassador Michal Mlynár. He's from academia, exact partner, and he understands why we are here. We need to combine theory and the practice. Sometimes what is in the theory is not in the practice, and what is in the practice should be in the theory. The region of the Central Europe Ambassador is representing is the region bordering with Ukraine, who is also contributing the migrants and enlarging the challenges to the region and to Europe. And I invite him to share with us on his country view from the regional perspective, most probably broader. All the ambassadors here, they are representing their own states. If they want to speak broader than their own states about European Union, it's in your hands. But I'm not insisting on that because you are in your personal capacity here. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this introduction and for the invitation. As you have mentioned, I feel at home in the academic setting, so it's always a pleasure to come and to contribute. Of course, I have been put into a difficult situation of being the last speaker at the moment when so many good things have already been said, and maybe I'm the last obstacle between the introductory remarks and the discussion. And usually it is the discussion which is the most important component of meetings like that, and this is where we can exercise some of the real questions. So really looking forward to that. But allow me to share with you a few points from my perspective, and of course a little bit also from the European perspective. Excellencies, dear colleagues, professors, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it has been mentioned several times today already that migration is a reality. But at the same time, it is a hot topic, a sensitive issue in many places and for many reasons, including in the media, including in parliamentary or other political discussions and discourse. But we have already mentioned here several times today that over the past year, the issue of migration has been high on the agenda of the United Nations and in particular of the General Assembly. And I think it is really important to emphasize, and probably it cannot be overemphasized, the great deal of work that has been done in recent 18 months on this particular topic. And this is really the important cornerstone that we should continue building upon, despite the challenges. So an event like that and a discussion like that is certainly a welcome opportunity as well. As my colleagues have already mentioned, people have always moved for various reasons: for education, for family, for employment and careers, or in other words, for better life. And we should take, in that context, migration as a natural thing. Despite what some media, including some European media, recently portrayed, most migration takes place within regions. For example, the highest portion of international migration takes place between developing countries, not between developing and developed world. And it is about 35% of migration that actually happens between developing countries, or if you will, within the South. Another interesting fact may be that migrants in 2017 contributed about 9.5% to global GDP, even though they only account for about 3.4% of global population. So there is a discrepancy, and actually a discrepancy in the favor of migrants. And while almost $600 billion in remittances were sent abroad in 2017, 85% of the migrants' income remain in their host countries. often contributing to local economies. So there is also, the economic optics which we can take. And let me stop here briefly and actually say that even for my own country, for Slovakia, which, as we sometimes like to say, lies in the heart of Europe, because if you ever look for the geographical center of Europe, you will find it. In a Catholic church, or right next to the Catholic church in Kremnické Bane in central Slovakia. So, of course, you may have different theories. You will find different theories of where the geographical center is, but we are proud to call ourselves the heart of Europe. And as the heart of Europe, we probably have a responsibility that comes with that. Slovakia is a country of about 5.5 million people, and currently I can say that about 65,000 Slovaks live in the United Kingdom. And this is a very recent phenomenon since 2004 when Slovakia joined the European Union. Well, we are facing some other issues in that particular country. In the United Kingdom, which is busy with the Brexit situation and the Brexit discussions, but nevertheless, it is a clear and strong indication of the meaningful nature of and the reality of migration in economic terms, in social terms, and other terms. It may be interesting from the United States point of view that about 800,000 people in the United States claim Slovak origin. So for a country of 5.5 million people having not necessarily a diaspora, but people who actually know that their ancestors came from that part of Europe, even though it may have not been called Slovakia at that particular time, that we have such an interesting number of people. And just to contribute also with the fact that about 500,000 Slovaks, 500,000, moved to the United States between 1880 and the mid-1920s. So I think it speaks for itself, and it is not at some point Bratislava, which is the capital of Slovakia, that was the largest Slovak city for various reasons. One of them, of course, being that it has always been a very multicultural, multilingual, and cosmopolitan city, and it is a city where German, Hungarian, and Slovak have always been spoken. So it was not Bratislava, but there were two other cities, Cleveland, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that had a greater Slovak population than the current capital of Slovakia. And then you would find a lot of Slovaks in the states of Illinois, New Jersey, New York, to just name a few. Or in Trenton, Connecticut, which is not too far from where we are right now, you would find the only non-territorial synod of the American Lutheran Church. We have the Slovak Zion Synod, which has the headquarters in Trenton, Connecticut, and we are proud of that particular element as well. So just to demonstrate a few points from the practical perspective of my own country. Well, briefly on some of the challenges that we are facing, because obviously I do not want to paint an idealistic picture or a situation where we do not see, we are blindfolded, we do not see the challenges. Challenges, of course, include large and uncontrolled movements place. They strain on countries and cities. There can be brain drains or surpluses of labor. Countries of all kinds can face security risks and demographic change. Also, migrants themselves may face vulnerability. We have seen more than 26,000 migrant deaths since 2014. Thousands more are trapped in a cycle of exploitation at the hands of smugglers and traffickers, and 48% of migrants are women. They often face violence and exploitation. So a number of challenges, and the GCM, the Global Compact, is exactly our way of addressing this particular global phenomenon, and our way of trying to address the situation through a global solution for a global problem. And I really believe that this is a comprehensive response that we have been able to take. And the conference in Marrakesh in December will really play a significant role on the way of finalizing our work on the Global Compact. As has been mentioned, it is not a legally binding document and does not create obligations, but it is a useful tool that we can rely on in terms of addressing the challenges. The Global Compact is based not on theory, but on what is actually happening on the ground. The drivers of migration have already been mentioned, but these are the so-called push factors that we, of course, are addressing through the Global Compact. Whether it is the issue of discrimination and social inclusion, or meeting labor demands, or the question of how to prevent migrants from falling into smuggling rings and risking people's lives, and children. Many unaccompanied, others abandoned. So these are the obvious challenges. Our answer that we have all presented to you this afternoon to the challenges is engaging through multilateralism. It has really been a test case for the UN and for multilateralism. And I believe so far we have been able to really give the best possible answer through the multilateral framework, addressing the complex, sensitive, and pressing global concern. And we have been able to do it together through consultations, through negotiations. And of course, the work is not finished yet. The conference in Marrakesh is not the end to the process. On the contrary, it is just a beginning, because as Ambassador Hilale and others have mentioned, there is a lot more that will be following, and the tool that we have at our disposal is there to help us. It is in no way intended to be prescriptive or to endanger countries' sovereignty or anything like that. On the contrary, it offers a cooperation framework that we have at our disposal. Actually, we can draw some parallel with the 2030 agenda. During those negotiations, also many thought it was undoable. But today we have the SDGs. They are also non-binding, but they have been a major step forward in terms of galvanizing the necessary work that we need to do in the development context. And migration actually is in all three pillars of the UN work, whether it is peace and security, social and economic development, or human rights. It is important to know that migration can be well managed and that it can therefore become a better agent for development as well. SDG 10 in particular has already been mentioned. Development can help to encounter push factors. It can ensure that people move not out of necessity, but by choice. The Global Compact, of course, we don't see as a magic pill or as a magic formula. But it is the first ever of its kind, and we can use it in many great strides. But as I have mentioned, we have a lot of work ahead of us because to really make an impact, the text, the compact, must come to life to truly benefit countries, but most importantly, to benefit the people. So I would stop at that for my introductory remarks, and will be very happy, of course, to engage in further discussion.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you to be the last but not the least. Good finish. And now I'm addressing the audience. We have some, I think, 20-25 minutes, a bit behind the schedule. But so we still have time for question and answers. Please be short. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for the representative from Morocco. Your Excellency, where does Morocco stand in relation to development of the Western Sahara and the possibility of settling refugees there as a way to deal with, two problems at once, perhaps convincing Europe, particularly the French, to invest in the region as the Moroccan-Spanish border becomes the next gateway for refugees attempting to enter Europe?
Thank you very much for your question. It's not the issue of our round table, but as I believe in freedom of expression, I will tell you that the Sahara is Moroccan, and there is political process that will lead for a political solution. And just the last resolution of Security Council 2440 is calling for political solution, pragmatic, realistic, and based on compromise. So Morocco is working with the personal envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. President, former President of Germany, Sir Horst Kohler. We will meet next month, inshallah. But the problem is we need Algeria to be around the table, because Algeria is the country that is hosting Polisario, is financing Polisario, is arming Polisario, is campaigning diplomatically for Polisario. So without their presence around the table, we cannot move forward. So let's hope that now that invitation have been sent to Algeria as party, as the first concerned party, we hope that by next month, inshallah, we might pave the way for real negotiations and pragmatic and realistic and political solution.
Thank you, Omar. Well, please.
My question is around climate change and climate chaos and extreme weather, and the ideas of safe, orderly, and regular migration as climate chaos kicks in more and more, preclude people from being able to make safe, regular, and orderly transitions as their homes are flooded and incinerated. Any of the panel to speak to that?
I've already mentioned or flagged this issue. I mean, just take the case of Bangladesh. We have a landmass of 55,000 square miles, and which is the state of Wisconsin here. And you pack 160 million people there, and with a global warming of maybe a couple of degrees centigrades in the next 20-30 years, 1/3 of Bangladesh is feared to be under water, and already we are seeing some trends of salinity encroachment and other things. So therefore, almost like 30 million people will be threatened to leave their lands or their homes for better or higher ground. Now we are doing whatever is possible on the adaptation sort of front. Mitigation, of course, we can change very little with our own carbon footprint already very low. Therefore, without international cooperation, without understanding of this problem, Bangladesh alone can never solve a problem of this magnitude. If we are talking about very small island developing states with 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 population, maybe other countries can come to rescue this population and maybe save them. But no one is going to take 30 million people. Even our neighbors will not be enthusiastic. So this is a major problem. We don't have any solution in our hand except to slowly adapt to this situation. But then if the global warming is actually rising as the way they are rising last year, being the hottest year in the planet, the trends are really, as you mentioned, chaotic, and this chaos cannot be tackled or solved by single countries. We need understanding and global cooperation. But I don't have any answer
Yeah.
to your.
Just to add a couple of words. When I was ambassador 3 years ago, for 9 years, we have been pushing through the Security Council to recognize the problem of the Pacific islands mostly, that climate change is existential for them because they are diving. And the first answer to your question is the climate migrants should be recognized as refugees. Because refugees, all of refugees are migrants, but not all migrants are refugees. Refugees are more or less protected legally, but migrants not. And so to bring the global community to understanding that for climate change migrants, this is existential issue, that Kiribati, Tuvalu, Vanuatu in Pacific, and not only in Pacific, they're disappearing. So for them, this is a security issue. That's why legal problem should be resolved. And
I think most probably what has become the most famous and best read document of Pope Francis is Laudato Si, on the care for our common home, the planet. And certainly it is a constant preoccupation. And I believe there has been some progress when it comes to dealing with the question of climate change at the international level. First of all, we have the Paris Accord of 2015, and in 3 weeks we have the COP24. I mean, the 24th Conference of States Party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and there will be certainly a big recognition on the fact that while it is difficult for many countries to change from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I think the highlights of the meeting will be that there would be a transition. I mean, everybody should work towards a transition from what it pollutes, what brings climate change, into renewable energy, clean energy. In the Global Compact itself, the question of recognizing not only sudden but also slow onset of natural catastrophes provoked by climate change came towards the end of the negotiations. There was much debate whether it should be included or not. In the end, it is included, but not as a separate objective, but as part of an objective. Now, the question of whether or not they should be recognized refugees as victims of what we call now climate change migrants. The term is not in the Global Compact yet, but certainly it is a very good point of debate whether or not they should be recognized as refugees, because there are other considerations like, if you are a victim of onset natural catastrophe due to climate change in a country, then you could be transferred to another part of the country, etc., etc. But there are indeed cases in which climate change has provoked tremendous migration and displacement of peoples. Probably the biggest example now is the advancing desertification in the South Sahara. Thank you.
more questions, please? Yes. Yeah. You first, lady. And then lady behind you.
Thank you so much for being here. On this issue of refugees, so you spoke most directly to the Global Compact on Migration, but UNHCR also facilitated the development of the Global Compact on Refugees, which is expected for adoption later this year as well. And I wondered if you saw these two compacts as just parallel instruments, both non-legally binding, or if they were supposed to complement each other in any specific ways. So just curious for your thoughts on how these two instruments are working together.
Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, a very pertinent one. I would like to recall that when we start discussion after the summit on migration almost 3 years ago, the objective was to have one document dealing with refugees and migration. But thanks to the, I will not say the fights, but the firmity and the combination of effort by Bangladesh, Mexico, Morocco, Philippines, we pushed to have two documents and to have two tracks. And our rationale was very clear. For refugees, there is already enough international law. We have conventions, and you have the right or the imperative of protecting refugees in all the international components and international treaties. But the other side, refugees, we have only one. Migration, we have only one, workers and their families. And even this document is not universal because there is only, I think, 51 countries. So that's why we push to have and to make pressure to have one document dealing with migration. Fortunately, we managed to have them separately. The Global Compact on Refugees just enforced and reaffirmed the principles on Refugees Convention on 1951 and its protocol of 67 and others instruments. But for the compact, that's the first one on migration, the first UN document. It's historical. It's just the beginning. It's not enough. It's not an exemplary document. I understand the frustration of my dear brother, the ambassador of Bangladesh. We all would like to have binding documents, to have more rights, protecting rights to the migrants. But unfortunately, we need to have consensual documents, a document that will be agreed by all countries. We don't want to have documents only for country of origin, or documents only for Africa or for Asia, or a country of transit. We want to have document that is dealing with the rights of migrants everywhere in their country of origin, transit, and destination. And also to have all countries on board to protect the migrants. Of course, I agree that for us, there is difference. For some countries, there is difference between legal and illegal migrants. But for us, it's a human being. It's a woman. It's children. It's men. It's old people. They have to be protected. They should not be put in jail. Children have to get all their rights protected, education, health. And this need to have common language. And when we have a consensual document, it means, and in definition of consensus, it means that is a sum of goodwill, of acceptation. That's why we have this document. It's not very weak. It's a comprehensive one, but it's just the beginning. And as it has been said already, as an evolutive and alive document. We hope that in the process of reviewing this document in the coming years, we will manage to improve it. But at least here we have a very strong, very historical, and very guiding document where cooperation will be the base and protecting the values and human rights of all migrants all around the world is there.
Hi, I'm Maya Prabhu, Yale School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. So about a month ago, we had an event, a two-day event, looking at climate-induced displacement. And we gathered a variety of experts around science, understanding migration, and legal experts. And we spent a lot of time trying to think about attribution. How do you think about attribution? How do you ascertain the causes of migration, which are always multifactorial, even for catastrophic events, even for slow-moving events? And because legal frameworks require some understanding of attribution in order to think about rights and responsibilities. You fall under this convention because this is why you've moved, as opposed to falling under the Refugee Convention because persecution is the basis, the primary basis for your movement. And actually, the two-day discussion made me think about the complexities of attribution, which made me think whether we need to move entirely away from a legal-based framework and move more to out-of-the-box creative solutions and economic solutions and economic reparations for mass populations that will be moving. And I take the point about consensuality, I take the point about moving the community, but I don't know that we have that time. And I really wonder if we ought to be moving away from the ideal legal framework and more to we need a mass global fund dealing with migration and moving populations and saving money for that, because we will be seeing that. We've already seen with this year's UNFCCC report, things are moving much faster than we expected.
Who knows the answer? Well, yeah. Yes, so the answer is in the question. Well, so you have a reason saying that. But any comments from the table? Yeah.
Well, I think the question of attribution, or there has been much already talk about what they call climate change justice. So it is very far from, obtaining international consensus, which means that, poor countries are very, as His Excellency said, have very small carbon footprint, because especially across centuries and decades and centuries, even they have not been industrial countries, so their carbon footprint is very slow, and yet the effects of climate change are being suffered mostly by them for many reasons, geographical, and also for reasons that they have no capacity for very small capacity for mitigation and adaptation, which are related to main, we might say, solutions to climate change. So that's why the question of climate change justice will not go away, but unfortunately, I would say it's still very, very far from being considered. It was a big question during the Paris Accord negotiations, which lasted 2 full weeks, but it did not get some traction, especially the wealthy countries, the industrial countries, who certainly have much bigger footprints, greenhouse footprints, carbon footprints across at least the Industrial Revolution time, would not accept that. But there was a little bit of an increase in the final moments of the negotiations of what we called a global fund, a common fund for climate, for mitigation and adaptation measures. So that was a kind of a compromise, but still very small as compared to what many of the developing countries really demanded. Thank you.
I'd just like to add that, of course, attribution is a very tricky and legally complicated issue. But then I believe that if we have a political consensus and kind of political will, then it is possible to sort of, find a cause and effect, and we can have carbon taxes and a fund, and then use that for compensation or resettlement of people who are directly affected by sea level rise in terms of losing their land. So theoretically it is possible, but of course we need a political will. If we deny the very existence of climate change, then of course we are going in the opposite direction. Thank you.
Let me just add, if I may, briefly. We have mentioned several times that this is the first step. This is the beginning. This is by no means the end of the process, and there have been other things already done. You probably know that also the International Organization for Migration, which has its headquarters in Geneva, has now been made part of the UN system for obvious reasons. We need to strengthen the frameworks. We need to strengthen the way we are able to address the situations on the ground. Of course, the situation on the ground is often complicated. Nobody can always have a clear distinction between which situation is a refugee and where it ends, and where there is a migrant, because things are of course more complex and more difficult. But it was felt that it is important to have this framework, both for refugees, which already is better covered, as colleagues have mentioned, but also for migrants. And it is a set of recommendations where member states can decide which one best fits according to the practical needs and the practical situations. Of course, we need to address also the financing frameworks, and We in the European context have been discussing this a lot and working a lot on strengthening also the mechanisms of financing. Trust funds have been set up which directly also address the issue of migration. But the approaches need to be comprehensive, need to be multifold, and we are certainly committed to continuing with these efforts.
Thank you. So it will be the last question because we are out of the schedule. Be concise, please.
My question is to Ambassadors Sergeyev and Momen. How do you view the role of regional powers like China, India, and Russia in resolving the Rohingya crisis?
Thank you very much. Of course, we depend a lot on the role of the neighboring countries who have a better understanding of the situation. In that context, China, India, and instead of Russia, maybe Japan would be more relevant. And they all have a role, and I think they are helping Myanmar at the moment to build infrastructure for the returnees, would-be returnees. And as the Secretary General says, that it's not only the physical infrastructure, but we have to also build bridges amongst different communities so that they feel safe, in a better atmosphere. So we have to also invest in the mental sort of infrastructure of that area in the society. And in that context, these countries can also, help Myanmar to have a better conducive environment so that these people, the Rohingyas, can actually return in safety, dignity, and in sustainability. So they have a huge role. But if that role is mixed up with political, geopolitical, or economic interest, then we end up in a very sort of complex and protracted situation. So we are working very closely with these countries so that we can actually solve this protracted issue. Thank you.
A few words to add. China and Russia, they are permanent members of the Security Council, and their voice could and should be more stronger there. Thank you. Well, let me, on behalf of you, to thank our panelists for being with us today, for sharing with us on the very complicated issue. Of course, the global community is looking at the ways how to protect the migrants legally, how to protect them operationally, because the biggest gap today, the lack of the legacy, the lack of the operationality. Well, how to bring the help in time, what to do with those who are diving in the Pacific, Indian, and Caribbean, what to do with them. There is no way to protect them from the climate changes. How to adapt them. If there is no way how to adapt, this is the only way to help them to move out. Who will host them? What the legal framework of this hosting? Temporary, permanently, whatever, nationality. So let me on your behalf to wish the summit in Morocco be successful, inshallah, to thank all the participants today, and you're welcome back for the next seminars, which will be the next semester only, so within the series of global governments. I invite you. Thank you very much.